The first time my husband hit me, I started planning my escape. It was not a dramatic blow, just a slap across my face during an argument about household expenses, delivered so quickly I barely registered it before the shock set in. My husband, Edward, Duke of Harrington, looked more surprised than I was. He apologized immediately, claiming stress over business matters, promising it would never happen again. I said I forgave him. But that night, lying alone in my chambers while he slept off the whiskey he had consumed after dinner, I made a decision. This marriage was not going to improve. It was going to get worse. And when it became unbearable, I would need a way out, so I began preparing. That was 8 years ago. I was 24 then, married for 2 years with a young son. Now I was 32, with 3 children and a file containing 8 years of meticulously documented evidence that would destroy Edward's case in any divorce proceeding. The second incident happened 6 months after the first. A shove that sent me stumbling into a table, bruising my hip badly. Again, Edward apologized. Again, I said nothing. But I went to Dr. Morrison, our family physician, and told him I had fallen. He examined the bruise and made careful notes in my medical file. I made certain those notes mentioned the exact date and described the injury in detail. The third incident was a grabbed wrist, twisted hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises. I wore long sleeves for a week and visited Dr. Morrison again. Another entry in my medical file. Another piece of evidence. Over 8 years, there were 14 incidents. Not frequent enough to be constant terror, but regular enough to establish a clear pattern. Each time I documented, visited Dr. Morrison, wrote detailed entries in my private journal, kept locked in a box only I could open. I also documented other things. Every gambling debt Edward accumulated, every late night at his club, every rumored affair with actresses or shop girls, every financial decision that put the estate at risk. I was not just waiting for the right moment to leave. I was building an ironclad case that no judge could dismiss. My maid, Sarah, knew. She had been with me since before my marriage and had witnessed several of the incidents. She was also documenting in her own private records, creating a parallel account that could corroborate mine. "You are very patient, my lady," she said one morning while helping me dress, carefully arranging my sleeves to cover new bruises. "Most women would have left by now or at least told someone. Women leave with nothing and spend the rest of their lives dependent on the charity of relatives or living in poverty," I replied. "I am not leaving until I can do so with enough evidence to secure my children and my financial future. That requires patience and planning. What if it gets worse before you are ready? Then I leave immediately with what I have. But I would prefer to leave on my terms, with overwhelming proof that makes Edward's defense impossible." I had one other critical ally, my father's solicitor, Mr. Pemberton. He was elderly now in his 70s, but his mind was sharp, and he had been outraged when I first approached him about preparing for a potential divorce. "Your father would never have allowed this marriage if he had known what sort of man Harrington truly was," Mr. Pemberton said when I first explained my situation. "He thought he was securing your future with a duke. Instead, he handed you to a brute. My father died believing I was happily married. I ensured he never knew otherwise. But now I need your help to end this properly." We had been working together for 6 years, carefully structuring my legal position. Mr. Pemberton had helped me secure my mother's inheritance in a protected trust that Edward could not access. He had helped me document Edward's financial mismanagement. He had quietly gathered information about Edward's affairs and gambling. By the time I was ready to actually file for divorce, I had comprehensive documentation of physical abuse, adultery, financial irresponsibility, and a lifestyle fundamentally incompatible with raising children. I also had something else: financial independence. My mother's trust fund provided £3,000 annually, not enough to maintain a duchess's lifestyle, but enough to live comfortably. I had been saving every penny for 5 years. I had nearly £15,000 in accounts Edward knew nothing about. The trigger that finally made me act came when Edward struck our eldest son, Thomas, then 12 years old. Thomas had questioned why his father was home so rarely. Edward's response was a backhand across the boy's face. I saw it happen. Watched my son's head snap to the side, saw the shock and hurt in his eyes. That was the moment I knew I could wait no longer. That night after Edward left for his club, I gathered my children and told them gently that we would be leaving their father. "Is it because he hit me?" Thomas asked, his hand unconsciously touching his still red cheek. "It is because he has hurt all of us in different ways for too long, and I have a plan to make certain we can leave safely and never have to return." My daughter Elizabeth, who was 10, looked frightened. "Where will we go?" "To London, initially. Then perhaps to Bath or somewhere quieter. But we will be together and we will be safe. I promise you that." My youngest, Henry, was only 6. He simply climbed into my lap and held tight. The next morning I sent a message to Mr. Pemberton. After 8 years of preparation, 3 words: "I am ready." The divorce petition was filed within a week. Edward was served papers at his club, a deliberate choice on my part to humiliate him publicly. His reaction was explosive. He arrived at our London townhouse in a rage, demanding to know how I dared to file for divorce, threatening to fight me with every resource at his disposal. I met him in the drawing room with Sarah and my butler present. I would not be alone with him again. "You cannot possibly think this will succeed," Edward said, his face red with fury. "I am the Duke of Harrington. You are nothing without me. No judge will grant you a divorce, and certainly not custody of my children." "We'll see what the judge grants once he reviews the evidence," I replied calmly. "What evidence?" "A few arguments, the normal difficulties of marriage. That will not convince anyone. Medical records documenting 14 separate instances of physical violence against me over 8 years. Witness testimony from servants. My private journals detailing each incident. Photographs of bruises. That should convince someone." Edward went very still. "You documented everything. Everything. Every blow, every threat, every incident. Dr. Morrison has detailed medical files. Sarah has her own records. I have my journals. You cannot deny what I can prove." His expression shifted from anger to something more calculated. "If you proceed with this, I will destroy you socially. I will ensure no one in society receives you. Your children will bear the scandal of having a divorced mother. My children will bear the truth of having a father who struck them. I have documentation of that as well. Thomas's medical examination after you hit him. Do you really want to fight this publicly, Edward? Do you want a court to examine your violence against your own son?" For the first time, I saw fear flicker in his eyes. He had not realized how thoroughly I had documented his abuse. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "A divorce on grounds of cruelty and adultery. Full custody of the children with limited supervised visitation for you. The London townhouse, which was purchased primarily with my dowry funds. An annual income of £10,000. Return of my mother's jewelry. Absolute silence from you about the reasons for the divorce. That is extortion. That is the minimum I will accept to avoid a trial where every sordid detail becomes public record. Fight me in court, Edward, and I will make certain every newspaper in London knows exactly what kind of man you are." Edward's barrister, Mr. Whitmore, tried desperately to negotiate lesser terms. But I had spent 8 years preparing for this. I knew exactly what I needed and I refused to compromise. The case went to court 6 months later when Edward refused to accept my terms. He still believed a judge would favor a duke over a duchess, regardless of evidence. He was spectacularly wrong. The courtroom was packed for the Harrington divorce proceedings. Society was fascinated by the scandal of a duchess divorcing a duke on grounds of cruelty. Most expected me to be destroyed in court, exposed as a vindictive wife exaggerating marital difficulties for financial gain. I wore gray again, the color of dignity and mourning. I sat beside Mr. Pemberton and my barrister, Mrs. Catherine Ashford, one of the few female barristers in London and absolutely ruthless in defending women's rights. Edward sat across the courtroom with his expensive legal team, looking confident that his title and money would prevail over my accusations. Justice Harold Blackwood presided. He was known for being conservative but fair, and Mrs. Ashford had assured me he would at least consider evidence rather than dismissing my case outright based on Edward's rank. The proceedings began with Mr. Whitmore presenting Edward's defense. "Your Honor, This is a case of a wife who wishes to punish her husband for failing to meet her unrealistic expectations. The Duchess has made serious allegations of cruelty and adultery, but these allegations are based on misunderstandings and exaggerations. The Duke has been a faithful husband and a concerned father. This divorce action is motivated by the Duchess's dissatisfaction with the normal challenges of aristocratic marriage. Ashford rose, and I saw Mr. Whitmore's confident expression falter slightly. Catherine Ashford had a reputation, and that reputation was formidable. Your Honor, I will prove through comprehensive evidence that the Duke of Harrington has been physically violent toward his wife on at least 14 documented occasions over 8 years. I will prove through medical records, witness testimony, and the Duchess's own contemporaneous journals that this violence was systematic and escalating. I will further prove that the Duke committed adultery with at least 3 different women, and that his financial irresponsibility put his family at risk. This is not about unrealistic expectations. This is about documented cruelty. She presented the evidence methodically. First, Dr. Morrison's medical records, 8 years of detailed documentation of injuries consistent with physical violence. The doctor himself testified, confirming that he had been concerned enough to keep extra detailed notes because he suspected domestic violence. Then Sarah's testimony. My loyal maid described witnessing 5 of the incidents directly and seeing the aftermath of others. She produced her own private journal where she had documented dates, times, and descriptions of my injuries. Then my journals. 8 years of careful, detailed entries. Not emotional ranting, but precise descriptions. Dates, times, what triggered the violence, exactly what happened, the nature of the injuries sustained. You planned this, Edward hissed across the courtroom during a recess. You have been planning to destroy me for years. I have been planning to protect myself and my children, I corrected. You destroyed yourself through your own choices. I simply documented the destruction. Most damaging evidence came when Mrs. Ashford presented the medical examination of our son, Thomas, after Edward had struck him. A 12-year-old child, examined by Dr. Morrison and found to have bruising consistent with being hit by an adult. Thomas himself was not required to testify, which I had insisted upon, but his medical records spoke volumes. Duke hit his own son, Mrs. Ashford said, her voice ringing with controlled outrage. That alone should tell this court everything it needs to know about his fitness as a parent and his claim that his wife is exaggerating his violent tendencies. Adultery evidence was equally comprehensive. Letters Edward had written to various women. Testimony from hotel staff about Edward staying in rooms registered under false names. Bills for jewelry and gifts given to women who were not his wife. Mr. Whitmore tried to argue that Edward's private life was irrelevant to custody and settlement questions, but Mrs. Ashford demolished that argument. Honor, the Duke's adultery is not merely relevant. It demonstrates a pattern of behavior, deception, financial irresponsibility, and complete disregard for his marriage vows and his family's welfare. These are precisely the factors this court should consider when determining custody and appropriate settlement. Trial lasted 3 days. By the 3rd day, even Edward's own barrister seemed to realize they were going to lose. Justice Blackwood delivered his verdict on the 4th day. I have reviewed all evidence presented by both parties. I have heard testimony from credible witnesses. The documentation in this case is extraordinarily comprehensive and compelling. He looked directly at Edward. Your Grace, the evidence of your physical violence against your wife is overwhelming. The medical records alone would be sufficient grounds for divorce. Combined with the witness testimony and the Duchess's own detailed journals, the picture that emerges is of a woman who endured years of abuse while carefully documenting it because she knew she would need proof to escape. Edward's face had gone pale. Evidence of adultery is equally clear. The letters alone would be sufficient, but combined with witness testimony and financial records, there is no doubt that you violated your marriage vows repeatedly. Justice Blackwood turned to me. Your Grace, I find that you have more than met your burden of proof. The divorce is granted on grounds of cruelty and adultery. I felt my shoulders relax for the first time in days. Regarding custody, the evidence is clear that the Duke is not a fit parent. He has been violent toward both his wife and his son. His lifestyle is fundamentally incompatible with raising children. Full custody is granted to the Duchess, with the Duke permitted supervised visitation at the Duchess's discretion. Edward stood abruptly. "This is outrageous. You cannot give her my children. Your Grace, you struck your 12-year-old son. That alone would justify this custody decision. Sit down or I will hold you in contempt." Edward sat, looking murderous. Regarding property and financial settlement, the London townhouse was purchased primarily with the Duchess's dowry funds. It is awarded to her. The annual income of £10,000 is reasonable given the needs of maintaining 3 children of a duke in appropriate circumstances. That amount is granted. The Duchess's personal property, including her mother's jewelry, is to be returned to her immediately. Justice Blackwood looked at both parties. "I find the Duchess's request to be not only reasonable, but modest given the circumstances. She endured 8 years of violence while carefully documenting it so that she could eventually escape with her children and sufficient resources to maintain them. That demonstrates remarkable foresight and courage." He banged his gavel. "This divorce is final. Court is adjourned." Courtroom erupted. Edward's supporters looked shocked. My few allies looked triumphant. The newspaper reporters rushed out to file their stories. Mrs. Ashford touched my arm gently. "You won, Your Grace. Everything you asked for." "Everything you prepared for." "One," I corrected. "I could not have done this without you and Mr. Pemberton." "You could have," she said. "You built the case, we simply presented it. The 8 years of documentation, the careful planning, the courage to endure while preparing. That was all you." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I made a brief statement, carefully worded to avoid excessive scandal while making my position clear. "I'm grateful that Justice Blackwood recognized the evidence and ruled accordingly. No woman should have to endure violence in her marriage. I hope this case demonstrates that women do have legal recourse and that judges will enforce the law fairly when presented with proper evidence." "Do you have a message for other women in similar situations?" a reporter asked. "Document everything. If you are in an abusive marriage, keep careful records. Visit a doctor and ensure injuries are documented in medical files. Keep a private journal with dates and details. Gather any evidence of adultery or financial mismanagement. Build your case before you leave, because once you leave, you will need that evidence to protect yourself legally." Scandal was enormous, of course. Society was divided between those who admired my courage and those who condemned me for publicly humiliating a duke. But I had my children, my home, and my financial security. Society's opinion mattered significantly less than it once had. Edward attempted to appeal, but the appeals court upheld Justice Blackwood's decision completely. The evidence was too comprehensive to dismiss. I settled into my new life in the London townhouse with my 3 children. We established routines built on honesty rather than hiding bruises and pretending everything was fine. Thomas, my eldest, became protective of his younger siblings and fiercely proud of his mother. "You were so brave," he told me. "Staying long enough to build the case we needed. I know that must have been terrible." "Was difficult," I acknowledged, "but necessary. If I had left earlier without sufficient evidence, I might have lost you all in custody proceedings. I could not risk that." "You ever think about just accepting it, about staying permanently?" "No. From the first incident, I knew I would leave eventually. I just needed to make certain I could leave successfully." That required time and planning. My daughter Elizabeth asked different questions. "How did you stay so calm? When father hurt you, how did you not scream at him or hit back?" I was not always calm internally, but I learned to control my external reactions because showing emotion would have made things worse and would not have helped my case. I had to be strategic rather than reactive. "I want to be that strong when I grow up. I want you to never need that kind of strength. But if you do, you will have it. You come from a long line of strong women." Over the following years, I became an advocate for women seeking to leave abusive marriages. I provided advice on documentation, connected women with sympathetic barristers, and occasionally provided financial assistance to those who lacked resources. I received hundreds of letters from women asking how I had managed to win such a comprehensive victory in divorce proceedings. I answered them all the same way: preparation, patience, documentation. Never confront your abuser without a complete exit strategy. Never leave without sufficient evidence to protect yourself legally. Some women followed my advice and successfully left abusive marriages. Others were not in a position to plan long-term and needed immediate escape. I helped both because every woman's situation was unique. 10 years after my divorce, I sat in my study reviewing correspondence when Sarah brought me the morning newspapers. "You will want to see this, my lady. The Duke of Harrington has died." I read the obituary with no emotion beyond mild curiosity. Edward had died at 48 of a heart attack, likely brought on by years of heavy drinking and dissipation. His second wife, whom he had married 3 years after our divorce, had apparently endured her own difficulties with his temperament. "Do you feel anything?" Sarah asked gently. "Relief, perhaps, that he can never attempt to interfere with the children again." "Mostly I feel nothing at all. He stopped mattering to me the moment Justice Blackwood granted my divorce. My children attended their father's funeral as a courtesy, but they felt no genuine grief. Edward had been a distant, frightening presence in their lives, not a beloved parent. Thomas inherited the dukedom at 22. He was everything his father had not been: thoughtful, kind, responsible. His first act as duke was to establish a trust fund to support women leaving abusive marriages. "In honor of my mother," he said at the announcement, "who demonstrated that escape is possible with sufficient planning and courage." 15 years after my divorce, I attended a legal conference where Mrs. Ashford was speaking about changing attitudes toward women's rights in divorce proceedings. "Harrington case was a turning point," she told the audience. "It demonstrated that comprehensive documentation could overcome even the most significant power imbalances." The Duchess spent 8 years building an ironclad case. When she finally filed for divorce, the Duke's title and money could not save him from the weight of evidence against him. After her speech, we shared tea and reminisced. "You know what I remember most about your case," Mrs. Ashford said. "Not the evidence, though that was extraordinary, but your composure. Throughout 3 days of trial, while every humiliating detail of your marriage was discussed publicly, you never once broke down, never cried or showed emotion. You were absolutely steady," cried plenty in private. "But in court, I needed to be the competent, rational party. If I had been emotional, Edward's barrister would have used it against me. They were looking for any excuse to paint me as hysterical or unstable. Instead, you were the picture of dignity and careful preparation. It was masterful. It was survival. I did what I needed to do to protect myself and my children." 20 years after the divorce, my youngest child, Henry, got married. At the wedding, my 3 children stood together and toasted me publicly. "To our mother," Thomas said, "who showed us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to plan and act despite fear. Who endured years of difficulty to ensure we could escape safely together. Who demonstrated that women are not powerless, even when the law is stacked against them." Guests raised their glasses, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of pride and relief and hard-won joy. They had expected the Duchess to crumble during divorce proceedings. They had expected me to be destroyed by Edward's title and money and social position. They had expected a typical case: a hysterical wife making exaggerated claims against her noble husband, easily dismissed by a sympathetic judge. Instead, they had encountered a woman who had spent 8 years carefully, methodically building a case that was impossible to dismiss. They had encountered documentation so comprehensive that no judge could ignore it. They had encountered a level of strategic planning that turned apparent powerlessness into decisive legal victory. I had not crumbled. I had prevailed. And in doing so, I had shown other women that escape was possible, that patience and preparation could overcome significant power imbalances, that the law, when presented with sufficient evidence, could protect women as well as it protected men. 25 years after that first slap that had started my 8-year preparation, I sat in my comfortable study surrounded by letters from women I had helped, photographs of my thriving children, and the quiet satisfaction of a life rebuilt on my own terms. Edward had expected me to crumble. Instead, I had spent years preparing, and preparation, I had learned, was the most powerful weapon a seemingly powerless woman could wield. Did the Duchess's strategic 8-year preparation inspire you? Like this video if you believe planning is more powerful than reacting. Comment below. Would you have had the patience to document for 8 years? What would you have done differently? Subscribe for more stories of women who turn patience into power and preparation into victory. Share with anyone who needs to know that escape from abuse is possible with careful planning. Hit that notification bell for more tales of strategic survival, legal triumph, and the courage to endure while preparing for freedom.